One of the things that has become intertwined, I guess, with the crunchy community is definitely people who choose to not vaccinate their children, anti-vaxxers. I vaccinate my children. I think that the risk of measles outweighs the risk of vaccine reactions. Um, I had my great grandmother had polio, was very short, had some lifelong health issues as a result of it. I can't imagine voluntarily having that happen to your children if there is an alternative approach. However, as a crunchy natural mom or whatever, I understand that, first of all, it's very scary to give your children vaccines. It's incredibly scary, actually. I remember with my first son, they came over in the hospital and they're like, "Oh, do you want this hepatitis B vaccine?" And I remember it being really scary. And I Googled some things, which of course ended up being not very reputable, but the things that came up were very scary. So I completely understand that. Although it does not cause autism, that has been debunked. That wasn't a real thing to begin with. Autism is much more complicated than that. There's a lot of different factors that environmental, genetic factors that predispose someone to autism anyway. Leaky gut. I mean, there's a lot of things they've done research on. So obviously, that's not. But I do think that there's something to be said that we don't know everything about vaccines. A lot of things that we think are safe end up not being as safe as we thought that they were. However, vaccines are very heavily tested. If you're not vaccinated against measles and you're exposed to it, you'll probably get it. So I definitely think there's a real risk there. I do understand the hesitation. I think it's wise that we don't just jump into things just because someone says that we should do that. However, um, I find it extremely frustrating when you're in these moms groups online or you meet moms that are anti-vaxxers. They're very aggressive and they're usually not really making very intelligent arguments. They often will say things that aren't true and they're very aggressive towards other people who present logic or facts or studies. Everything is a conspiracy theory that these people the government is trying to con your children and things like that, which I don't really think is the case. But, and they just aren't presenting very logical arguments. And it would be different if they could come to you and say, well, here's some actual information, not from some crazy independent source trying to sell essential oils, but, actual data. I think it would be different, right? I think that if you could honestly give real information. One of the arguments that I think is more logical but has been disproven is that, oh, you shouldn't give all of these vaccines to your children at once. It's too much for their immune system, which is somewhat logical to me if I were to be honest. But when you look into the actual data that is there, your children are exposed to thousands of germs and viruses every day. 3 more isn't really different. I mean, if you're concerned of that, don't take them to the museum or school the day you vaccinate them, because that will reduce their exposure to viruses. But kids are breeding grounds for all sorts of bacteria and viruses anyway. So although there's some logic perhaps, and that seems to be a more logical argument against vaccination, or at least giving all the vaccines at a visit, it doesn't really seem to be based in evidence. And I think that's the biggest problem with anti-vaxxers, is that when you have to look at it objectively, right? If you're having a conversation with someone and they're just putting out offensive memes and then no facts, it really is hard to take them very seriously. I think my own perceptions of, mandatory vaccinations and all sorts of things have really changed over the years as measles has been brought back into the United States after basically being eradicated. So I understand someone's choice not to vaccinate. I understand wanting to limit the exposure to chemicals and foreign substances. But I have 2 things about that. Number one, I would like to see people be less aggressive on both sides, but mostly anti-vaxxers towards other people, because it is a complicated decision. There are medical reasons to not be vaccinated. You might have certain health conditions or allergies. So I think we need to be respectful of people who, for those reasons, don't vaccinate. And I think people who just choose to not vaccinate, I would hope they become more educated and can make more logical arguments about why they choose not to vaccinate. Because just choosing because it's trendy, that does put your kids at risk for things, and you need to make educated decisions about whether you're comfortable with that.